Thank you very much, Inose-san. It's glad to see you again, of course, after so many years, and glad to see everyone here. It's my honor, really, to be here at the RIETI Research Institute. Over the years, the dialogue has been with METI as a whole, of course, has been something very, very meaningful to me in my own career. When I was a graduate student at Harvard University many years ago, Fukawa Shinji, later your vice minister, was one of my main advisors as I was working on Zaisei Toyushi, and he was the Sangyo Shikin Kacho of METI at the time. Introduced me to later Vice Minister Konaga, Kono-san, Kusaka-san, Toyoda-san, Okada-san, Hirose-san. Hirose-san was a student as well. So over the years, not only those, but so many others of your seniors have been people that I have deeply respected. And so it's wonderful to be back here at METI. To preface my talk with the introduction to that, you'll see that what I want to do is to bring geography back in the ways that geography actually shapes economics, security, transactions in the world as a whole. Ultimately, actually, geography relates, I believe, to some of the most important issues that you and we as well are facing together in the world. The depth of the seas, of course, are bringing critical minerals to the fore again, and that's a location for finding them. Technological changes, including robotics and AI, of course, are changing the dynamics and the meaning of the seas themselves. And that, of course, highlights the importance of the seas. One big point that I plan to make and that you'll see in my presentation is that certainly geography, the world as we know it, the mountains, the land, the seas, in a certain way is immutable and much less changing than human existence. But the functional role of the seas, just like the land, is transformed by new technology and by a changing global political economy. And so I think we need to look at the seas with fresh eyes. It's a good place to understand the ways that geography actually functionally is changing in our lives. And particularly the seas have been ignored. We live on the land, we tend to focus on the land, but changing technology, as I said, robotics and AI among them, is really changing our ability to reach into the sea, to understand what is happening under the sea, and that we need to pay more attention, not least, of course, here in Japan, being a Shimaguni surrounded by the seas. And I think in many ways having a deeper existential understanding of the sea than almost any people on Earth. Advanced technology and an instinctive understanding of the importance of the sea. I'm especially glad to be talking about this here in Japan. The United States, speaking as an American, of course, also the seas have been for America across its 2.5 centuries a moat, a great moat. It separated the United States from the world. It may make us, in a sense, more isolated and standoffish from much of the world than countries that are right next to continents. But it also has been a great source of strength in that we have the ability to deter and the ability to defend in a different way, but that flows in part from an understanding of the sea and the ability to be strong in national defense terms on the sea. So in different ways, I do think the seas are extremely important to the future of the United States-Japan relationship, just as they are to Japan itself. And what I'm trying to say in this book is we need to think about that from a broad perspectives. Now, this book focuses, as you can just see from the map right in front of you, on the seas, particularly between Yokohama and Southampton in England. That has been, of course, across the 20th century from the days of Nichie Dome. It was a fundamental matter of strategic importance for Japan. It was a matter of tremendous importance to the British Empire. Today, it's also a matter of great strategic importance to China, as a range of recent Chinese strategic documents and so on outline. It isn't looked at as much as the seas across the Atlantic or the Pacific, because that's where most of the economic trade and so on of the world has been. But of course, in some ways, energy is what interested me in this directly. Of course, Japan imports 99% of its energy, maybe about 85% of its energy from the Persian Gulf or the Arabian Gulf, whichever way you want to mention it. And so energy, it's very clear. And of course, China, the seas are also extremely important from China's perspective too, which I think sets up again the geoeconomic importance of this particular set of sea lanes. The United States doesn't do nearly as much trade across those Eurasian sea lanes as either Japan or China does. We've adopted the Indo-Pacific concept, but that was originally really proposed by Prime Minister Abe and his strategic colleagues, rather than by the United States. It was suggested to the U.S. by Japan, which I think is interesting, but the fundamental underlying economic and geopolitical interests, I would say, are even more significant for Japan than they are for the United States in those sea lanes, which is something that makes them a matter of some importance now, too, given an American administration that, while it has a strong interest in national security, also is conceiving of that in somewhat different terms than has been traditionally the case. So I could go on, but I do think, and after this research, I feel even more strongly that the sea lanes in general and the Eurasian sea lanes in particular, which link you across the Indian Ocean, the Strait of Malacca, the Red Sea, and so on, to Europe, are extremely important, and even becoming more so in this particular era of the Trump administration and in the United States. Let me go now to our PowerPoint, some of the specifics. I'd first like to discuss the geography, the underlying geography of the sea lanes between Japan and Europe. Strategically, of course, the distinctions often made between the so-called first island chain, stretching, as you can see, down from Japan down, to the South China Sea and so on. And then the second island chain, which is gaining greater prominence because of the increasing speed of missile technology and so on, and also the importance from a deterrence point of view of having a more sophisticated and robust line of defense. Places such as Guam and Palau, as you'll see, down in the south, which is right between, if you look at the map, the most direct route between Guam and Taiwan and the Taiwan Straits. Going further to the west, you'll see, of course, the west entrances to the Strait of Malacca. I'd just like to highlight those because they actually accent the strategic importance of this so-called Quad organization. The Andaman Islands, for example, right here at the mouth of the Strait of Malacca is owned by India. On the south, you have the Caucasus Islands and also the Christmas Island owned by Australia. So strategically speaking, those countries are important. I also, out to the west, you see Diego Garcia also. It's owned by Britain, but effectively one of the most important bases by the United States. So the moving then further to the west, of course, we have the Indian Ocean itself, and that is important. There's a number of areas of strategic importance that we'll see: Sri Lanka, the Maldives. Another interesting thing that I noticed in my research, the Bay of Bengal is really the back door to China. Notice how close, this is China here. Notice how close the Bay of Bengal is to Yunnan province of China, and then of course across the mountains to Shanghai and so on as well. Moving further to the west, we have the Arctic Ocean, which is also becoming more and more strategically important because the Arctic Ocean is thawing. Ondanka is causing it to become more open. And the Russian side, as you see here, of the Arctic Ocean on the right-hand side of my chart is quite important, which raises issues that we have coming to the fore, like icebreakers and so on, that are a topic even of U.S.-Japan negotiations right now. Further to the west, of course, we have the Red Sea, whose strategic importance has been highlighted, or its military importance, by the recent conflicts in Yemen and Gaza and so on. But actually, as I got into this, the strategic importance is being enhanced also by technology. About 20% of internet traffic worldwide actually flows through Egypt, of all places, as you might know. The Red Sea is a conduit because 95% of the internet flows through under the sea. Is actually a very important conduit for internet, and also rather vulnerable, as well as being, of course, a important energy linkage between Europe and also broader trade linkage between the Gulf and Europe. And since the beginning of the Ukraine war, of course, where Europe's energy relationships with the Middle East have increased, it's more important strategically than ever, and even in many ways very important for Japan as well. So changing technology and geopolitics change, as we can see from the case of the Red Sea, they change the importance of specific bodies of water. Now, this pattern has been common across history. In the book, I go into much more detail than we have time for now, but I'd like you just to look at the chart, and you'll see In the early days, of course, the seas were important as a way of imperial control and, of course, certain kinds of commerce. But that has rapidly expanded to energy supply, to communications infrastructure. I mentioned the internet is mostly under the sea. And then recently, as a catalyst for the information society itself, not to mention the supply of critical materials and so on. So, you know, over history, it used to be hundreds of years ago, you couldn't get from Europe to East Asia in simply one swoop. You had to wait for the monsoon winds to come, and you had to wait for several months in Arabia or in India to go on to the next location further to the east. But of course, that has changed dramatically. The rising importance of energy is very clear. We have more than 3 times increase since the 1990s in the volume of energy flow between the Gulf and Northeast Asia. Historically, of course, as I was saying earlier, the sea lanes to Eurasian sea lanes, very important for the British Empire. As you can see here, Australia, Hong Kong, ultimately the alliance with Japan, the Nichie Dome. There's many strategic reasons in the beginning of the last century when the sea lanes, Eurasian sea lanes, very important to the British. But even today, of course, to the United States, I mentioned earlier, the Quad has a whole set of very important strategic ties, and in that connection, we shouldn't forget that the Eurasian sea lanes provide a very important form of leverage on China also, which is becoming extremely dependent on the Gulf for energy. The more rapidly China grows economically, the more dependent since the 1990s it has become on the sea lanes to the Gulf. Of course, now with EVs, with solar power, China's been trying very strongly to reduce this dependence on the Gulf. But that that dependence, which is a point of significant leverage to the Quad nations, still does remain, as I think the geography of the sea lane shows us. Now, let me turn briefly to some important points of vulnerability for the United States, speaking as an American, but they have great implications, I think, for Japan and for China and for Korea, and also for the agenda that we are confronting in Japan-U.S. relations, including, I would not be surprised, the summit meeting coming up between President Trump and Prime Minister Ishiba in Canada later this month. This is, of course, far from the changing economics of shipping, but it's not unrelated. As you can see here, the container revolution, which began during the Vietnam War, and as a result actually of an invention by an American, has led to a revolution in shipping, and also to great increases in the economies of scale of shipping vehicles. Now, the major powers in shipping still, because of the statistics, because of intra-regional shipping, for example, inside the Mediterranean Sea or the Baltic Sea. This is the reason that these 3 large European companies are so high. Maersk, of course, is very global. We see Maersk strongly in the Asian sea lane, the Pacific sea lanes. In the United States, we see as well. So I would say Maersk is something of an exception, but MSC and CMA, of course, are much more regional. So if we accept them, the rising power that I want to highlight here is really COSCO, the large Chinese shipping line, which is becoming very important in the sea lanes, the Eurasian sea lanes between Shanghai and Southampton in particular. If we go further down, of course, one large Japanese shipping company, which is a consolidated version of several large Japanese companies. We've got Taiwan, we've got Korea, and we have Taiwan. Taiwan's surprisingly important in this area, but nothing from the United States. The Matson Lines, the largest American shipping firm, is number 28 in the world. And so there's a huge gap there. China also is quite dominant among the world's container shipping ports. As you can see, number 2, number 6, number 10 are not in China, but the other biggest ones are all in China. What this is a matter of China having capitalized because of its rapidly expanding trade on the changing economics of container shipping that I was showing you earlier, which of course has led to very strong Chinese competitiveness in shipping, as shown by the position of COSCO and perhaps some rising strength in the future. Now, there are many nations along the sea lanes. I'll go into this in detail later, but and of course there's leverage to different countries. One broad form of leverage, of course, has been treasury holdings, but I can come back to this as well. Let me, in conclusion, go so that I look forward to hearing from Nishizawa-san and others of you here, to the key points that I wanted to make. First of all, geography matters to strategy and the economy. Thomas Friedman, I respect. Lexus and the olive tree, the world is flat. But the world really is not flat for many of the most important reasons that matter to the world, and I would say to METI being responsible for energy issues. For example, if you look at energy, I think we all would agree that the world is not flat. So geography matters. But the point I wanted to make that you hopefully saw from my slides is geography, the functional role of geography is changing. Technological change, such as the importance of the internet, is raising the importance of geography, and particularly the seas. Developments such as robotics and AI and the importance of critical minerals are also increasing the importance of geography, or they're changing the functional role of geography, particularly, once again, under the seas. And I would say in the Trump era of, if we could call it that, of U.S.-Japan and and the relationships of Japan in the world, that's even more true. The tariff issue, in a sense, naturally causes other countries to begin to wonder about broader relationships, to wonder about changing trade patterns. I would say, you take the U.S. and Japan aside, certainly for the Europeans, this would be true, just as the possibility of a new approach to the Ukraine war also begins to change the calculations in Europe. For the Chinese, of course, also facing strong pressures on the tariff fronts, changing calculations, that begin to increase the importance of the Eurasian sea lanes, even more than the reasons that I was earlier mentioning, like the energy flows to the Gulf and the internet flows, and then, of course, the uncertainties in the geopolitical side, and then the leverage that comes from the dependence also of China on the Gulf, which might be declining slightly because of EVs and solar power and so on, but is continuing and is much more substantial than it was even 2 decades ago. So these Eurasian sea lanes may not directly involve the U.S. It's true enough the U.S., under the first Trump administration, began to talk under the influence of Prime Minister Abe's administration to talk about the Indo-Pacific. How fundamental are the American interests in the Indo-Pacific? I do hope, as an American, and particularly for the sake of the U.S.-Japan relationship, that continues to be strong. But the volume of trade that occurs, the kind of energy dependence that exists, are fundamentally different. And the broad geopolitical implications, of course, if the character of the Eurasian sea lanes changes, or the nature of the relationships around the basin of the Indian Ocean and so on changes, will have global implications. So it's something that I think we all may not have paid enough attention to, that I hope will become a subject of greater importance. And I look forward very much to hearing from all of you and getting your sense of the meaning and the future importance of this important issue. So, thank you very much. Arigatou gozaimasu.